All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here doing a preview and prediction for the Rose Bowl game between Penn State and Utah. 2.5-point line in favor of the Utes. Over-under is at 52.5. Monday, January 2nd, 5 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN from Rose Bowl Stadium in Pasadena, California. First meeting ever between these two schools. This is a Utah offense that was guns up blazing against USC after a slow first quarter in the Pac-12 title game. They really turned it on in that one. Tremendous balance and versatility from this offense, not just in that game, but all year round. 252 yards per game through the air for Cam Rising in this passing attack, 220 yards per contest on the ground. Tavion Thomas, of course, he's been out last couple of games with an injury. Won't play in this one. It's going to be up to Micah Bernard, 474 yards and 4 touchdowns. And Jaquindon Jackson, 450 and 8 touchdowns. Former quarterback, converted to running back here the last 2 games. He's been great. 5 touchdowns, 100-plus yards in games against USC and Colorado. Even had 97 in a score against Arizona back in early November. Jackson's really did a lot for this backfield. He's a very fast and powerful guy for being 6'2", 227. Obviously he was a dual threat quarterback coming out of high school, so he knows how to run the football, and he's really been a big time, unsung hero for this offense. Look at Cam Rising, 409 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's been around a long time. It seems Nick, second year in a row, he's going to be in the Rose Bowl. Was unable to finish last year's game. He got knocked out, I believe, due to a concussion. But coming into this game, 2,900 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 7 picks through the air. For Utah, they're going to be without, some top pass catcher. Dalton and Nick, he's opted out for this one. He's a phenomenal tight end for them. Brant Kuithe, of course, he hasn't played since the first month of the year. So it's going to be up to Devon Bailey and Money Parks. I think these guys have been pretty solid assets to this offense. Bailey, 595 yards on 50 grabs and 5 touchdowns. Parks, 402 yards and 2 touchdowns, had a big touchdown against USC. Then after that, it's a big fall-off. It's Micah Bernard, who's the next pass catcher on this team. Very thin at pass catcher, and now they don't have a single tight end out there. It's going to be up to Thomas Yasmin, who's got 5 touchdowns, averaging 25 yards, have healthy workload. What are your expectations for this offense, Nick? Yasmin has had big touchdown receptions each of the last 2 games, so I think he's going to do very well in this game. But it's certainly a concern because this offense loves to utilize their tight ends, and the 2 top ones are now both out for this game.
I do worry considering Utah is missing their 2 top tight ends. The tight ends play such a heavy role in this offense. They're big figures in this offense. They play solid roles. There are a lot of targets in the red zone. Cam Rising loves to hit his tight ends for a touchdown here and there. Kincaid, he's 8 touchdowns there that they lose with him, and Kuithe as well. They're losing 3 touchdowns with him. So certainly is a big loss at the tight end position, but I think they have a solid offense top to bottom. Rising, great year as we expected, almost 3,000 yards passing plus the 400 on the ground. 25 touchdowns through the air plus a 6 on the ground for him. Good season overall, 66.2% completion percentage, only 7 interceptions. Rising, great leader, type of guy you want to have leading your offense. He's going to get you guys motivated. He's a very excited guy to play for. Micah Bernard and Jackson, these guys are 2 good backs. Jackson, of course, unsung hero, stepping up lately, like you highlighted, the 8 touchdowns for him. Fantastic. Mike Bernard's a back that we loved in the preseason. We thought him and Thomas were probably the best duo, 1-2 punch of backs in the country. Bernard didn't really get as much yards as we'd hoped he would. Didn't get as many touches as he might hoped he would, but he does have 4 scores on the season, 5 yards per carry on the season. Solid season for Bernard overall. I like Money Parks. I like Dalton. I like Deuce Valet. These guys are solid wide receivers. Parks, I would like to see him be a target a little bit more this season. Hopefully get some targets here in the Rose Bowl. But I like this offense. I think they'll put some points against this Penn State defense that has had a good season.
It's also a really good offensive line, only 9 sacks allowed. Paul Nolly up front leads a very physical unit. Braden Daniels, I think, has been very good for them as well. This is a pretty respectable unit top to bottom for Utah, despite being thin at some of these positions. They've had guys step up, and that's going to continue, I think, here in Pasadena. Look at the Penn State offense, a pretty quiet unit of sorts, 36 points per game, 250 of those yards they put up coming through the air, 432 total, 182 on the ground, really led by 2 freshman running backs, Keytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. These guys were going to have some big shoes to fill. I think they did it pretty admirably. 941 yards, 10 scores for Singleton. Allen, 830 and 9 scores of his own. Clifford, 5 touchdowns, 177 yards rushing through the air. But, same old Sean Clifford, I think, Nick. This is going to be, I believe, his final hurrah here in a Penn State uniform. 2,500 yards, 22 touchdowns, 64% completion rate on the year. Biggest problem for him is Parker Washington. His top pass catcher has opted out. But Mitchell Tinsley, 45 grabs, 528 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's going to be the go-to guy in this one. He's got a very similar skill set. He can win from the inside as well. So I definitely think they're going to utilize him a little bit more in these different areas. Brenton Strange at tight end, 32 yards. Keandre Lambert-Smith, a guy I think is also going to get involved more in this one, as will Harrison Wallace. Nick, this is an interesting offense because they certainly have some nice balance. Sean Clifford, though, again, it's been kind of the same that it's always been with him. Does have those 7 interceptions. Completion rating isn't the highest of marks you like to see, but top to bottom, he's been very consistent throughout his career and been no different this year. What do you think he's going to do here? And again, I think his final game is a Nittany Lion.
I think the ceiling was certainly capped with Sean Clifford entering this season. You knew what you're going to expect out of Clifford, a solid quarterback who was going to throw some touchdowns, get a good chunk of yards, have a decent completion percentage, and maybe be involved in the running game a little bit. Clifford, this offense was never going to elevate with Clifford at the helm. They were going to need it. There has to be a change, kind of like you saw at Michigan, where they went with J.J. McCarthy. That was the type of change Penn State would have needed to be a team that could have got further than the Rose Bowl. But Clifford's going to be a good guy. He's going to get steady wins for you, lead you to a solid season every single year under the helm. And I think we've seen the last sim, but 10 wins under Clifford and Penn State. This has not been a bad season at all for the Nittany Lions. An offense, it's not been bad. I like the numbers coming out of this offense. I think they've produced when they needed to, 35.8 points per game, 432 total yards of offense. Not a bad number at all. Clifford, solid quarterback. Like I said, the ceiling capped with him early on in his career. 63% completion percentage. You obviously want a little bit higher out of him. This 22 touchdowns to 7 interceptions ratio is a bit worse than you were hoping for. Singleton and Allen, 2 fantastic backs. Singleton almost 1,000 yards on the ground. Incredible talent these 2 young guys have. 10 touchdowns for Singleton. Allen, 830 yards on the ground. The load split was very similar. This is about a 50-50 split for these guys. I love the balance they have with the 2-back system here. I think this really does create sort of a new dynamic you need to keep an eye on if you're a defense playing against this team. Losing Parker Washington is definitely a huge blow. Mitchell Tinsley, solid wide receiver. He has been a great number 2 all season, but can he step up and be that number 1 guy in the Rose Bowl? Definitely big shoes to fill.
Their top tackle, Fashana, he's likely going to be out for this game as well. He's been out numerous weeks with an injury. Offensive line, I think this year's been really good. Juice Scruggs at center leading the way for them. And that was a unit of concern coming into the year. I think Penn State, I think they certainly exceeded expectations on offense, at least for me, because they showed up very much so against Ohio State and not so much against Michigan. But I think for the most part this year, very solid, sound season for Penn State. Look at this defense they're going to be facing. The Utes, 20.5 points per game allowed. Not much on the ground, though. It's a deep front 7 that's had its inconsistencies, but I think they're going to probably have a much better time in this one. They did not look good at all against USC in that first quarter. A lot of things changed the rest of the game. Caleb Williams got hurt, and it was making things so much easier for this pass rush to finally come alive. But I certainly think his limited mobility led to a lot of those sacks. They ended up with 7 of them. And I think that's certainly a little bit skewed because this pass rush, Nick, throughout the year has not been that great. I think Gabe Reed's been a phenomenal transfer addition from Stanford. Mohamed Diabate, he's been phenomenal. He has 5 sacks this year. He's also one of their leading tacklers, with stops. And Van Fillinger, he's a guy that's been hurt. I don't know if he's going to get to go in this one. Karen Reed, Simone Papa, Lander Barton, and then Jonah Ellis, defensive end. This is a very deep front 7, Nick. They got plenty of guys at linebacker and on the defensive front. I'll have you talk about the pass rush here in a second, but I think the secondary, they don't have Cole Bishop playing. Obviously Parker Washington being out for Penn State kind of offsets that a little bit in its own regard. But, R.J. Hubert, Cole Bishop, this is a safety duo. It's really been great down the stretch. 75 tackles for Hubert, 77 for Bishop. He's also a phenomenal playmaker off the edge for them. They like to utilize him in the box a lot. He's got, a lot of tackle for losses in the last 2 years. Only 6 this year. We had a lot last year towards the end of the year. But when you talk about getting to the backfield, that's what Utes do pretty good. Not so much at sacking the quarterback, but I think Reed with his 10 tackles for loss, he's been a great run defender. Diabate, again, 12.5 TFLs. That leads the team. And Karen Reed's been a pleasant surprise for them as well. What are your thoughts on this defense, Nick? Because the secondary certainly struggled at times. Now their top cornerback is out. But Penn State doesn't exactly possess that speed on the outside that's really going to worry you too much. But in terms of attacking you from the slot, I certainly think that's a spot they could be vulnerable in. And considering how they played against a mobile quarterback before he got hurt, and Caleb Williams twice this year, Sean Clifford, that's something he can possess. He's not quite set, but he certainly is a dual threat guy that can win on the outside and make plays with his legs, and that might hurt this defense.
The secondary, I like the way the secondary has gotten better throughout the season. Bishop and Hubert together are solid in the back end. Losing Clark Phillips definitely is a bad loss. Solid player, just has not quite played a whole lot this year. 6 interceptions, though. That's a lot to lose for a talented guy. I do like Bishop and Hubert together. The 2 of them combined 4 interceptions, leading the team in tackles, both of them. The front 7, I really do like. They do put a lot of pressure, but they do lack the sacks. They can't seem to finish off in the backfield, but they do have a lot of pressure they get after the quarterback. Diabate, I love him at linebacker. Fantastic linebacker. Great team leader. 5 sacks for him. 52 total tackles. I like Reed on the defensive line. 5.5 sacks, certainly a great number of him. 39 total tackles. Connor O'Toole, 1.5 sacks, 36 total tackles for him. He has a pass breakup as well. I like this defense. The front seven, I think, is talented. They just have to find a way to finish off plays. Can they sack the quarterback? Can they get Clifford on the ground? If they make Clifford uncomfortable and finish off plays and stop the run in the backfield, I think Utah will have a lot of success.
Now, the Utah run defense first half of the year wasn't exactly that great, especially in the week 1 game against Florida. But the last 4 games, they've been absurd. They've held opponents to under 62 yards in 4 straight games. They did that in 5 of the last 6, rather. This run defense, Nick, has been incredibly crushing. And now they're facing a Penn State rushing attack that is pretty versatile with their 2 freshman backs. That's what they're going to want to do. They're going to want to win on the ground. And, how do you see that playing out? Because this is, certainly a part of this football team, especially with guys like Junior Tafuna up the middle, to have all of a sudden, blossomed into what we expect they'd be all season long here over the last month of the year, to one of the best run defenses in college football at this moment in time.
Absolutely love this run defense. 107 yards given up per game on the ground. A bit skewed considering they gave up some numbers early on this season. I think Penn State does have a significant advantage considering the 2 backs they have. I like the duo they have. Both young guys can really kind of create their own plays and break off tackles if necessary. I like this front seven, the pressure they've been able to put in the backfield and great stops. I think that's the key matchup to watch in this Rose Bowl. Can Penn State attack on the ground? Can Utah nullify that attack? If Utah's able to stop the run early on in the game, force Clifford into situations where he has to throw the ball deep and kind of create plays on his own and use his own magic, I think Utah will have a lot of success.
Looking at a Penn State defense that's been its own right this year. They weren't so good against Ohio State or against Michigan for the entirety of the year. Very sound unit. Abdul Carter stepping up at linebacker, 10.5 tackles for loss for him. Chop Robinson, 8.5. Carter also has 6.5 sacks. These are 2 freshman players that have stepped up, or young players rather, that have been phenomenal for this defense and have really led the way. The run defense last year really collapsed at the end of last year, and I think for the most part this season it's been a really sound unit. They're only giving up a couple north of 100 yards this season, and same as Utah. The last 5 games they've held opponents to under 100 yards. Ohio State was able to churn out 98. They've allowed 65 or less in the last 4 games. They even held Maryland scoreless, held Michigan State to only 16 points. This is a defense that's certainly been good, especially over the last month of the year. Again, Penn State struggled against Michigan, gave up 400-plus rushing yards in that one. But since then, Nick, they've been elite. They held Mohamed Ibrahim in Minnesota to only 165 the next week. And, again, they went on a streak of 5 in a row of less than 100 yards. So James Franklin, Manny Diaz made that a focal point of this defense, and they've certainly responded, emphatically. The secondary, this is a really good unit. Joey Porter, of course, he's going to the NFL draft. Kalen King, though, he's going to take over the lead cornerback roles here. He's been probably a better coverage defender this year, honestly, than Joey Porter. Probably not as talented, but King has certainly been a very good ball player. He's going to be phenomenal next year. Dominic DeLuca at safety, I think he's been very impressive. Jair Brown, this is a guy who's a great pass rusher, a great ball hawk for Penn State. Top to bottom, Nick, this is a defense I think this entire Nittany Lion team has been very quiet this year. Curtis Jacobs at linebacker, one of the veterans that came back. This is a very young unit for the most part. PJ Mustipher coming back. He's been a big tackler for them in the middle. And of course, last year when he went out, that's when the run defense really went down the hill, and him being healthy for 12 an asset for them. This unit certainly played a lot better than I expected they would be all the way back in August when we previewed this team. Been very impressed with it. One more masterpiece left to win the Rose Bowl. Do they have it in them?
When we previewed this defense, we kind of wondered what Manny Diaz would bring to a defensive coordinator, former Miami of coach. Of course, stepping down and joining James Franklin's staff. I liked the hire. I thought it was an interesting hire. And it certainly has proved to work out great for this defense. Jair Brown at safety, fantastic year for him. 6'6" total tackles, 3 sacks, 3 interceptions for him. He can really do it all. Ball hawk safety, I love it. Abdul Carter, freshman, fantastic year. 6.5 sacks, 55 total tackles. He's been a great player at linebacker. The fact that he's only a freshman, got 2 years at least out of him. I think he's going to continue to be a star to watch on this Penn State team. Curtis Jacobs, another great linebacker. Kobe King, Tyler Eldson. There are some seriously great linebackers on this team. Jonathan Sutherland as well. These guys all pitch in, put a lot of tackles in, a couple sacks here and there. Curtis Jacobs has 2 sacks and an interception on the season. I think this front seven's fantastic. They get after the ball. They stop the run. Numbers against the run are impressive. 105.2 yards allowed per game against the run is a fantastic number on the season. The passing yards allowed is not a bad number either at 212. This defense overall is fantastic top to bottom. I like the secondary. I like the way they progressed throughout the season. Yes, the Ohio State game is certainly a one-off, but I think Ohio State's offense has proven that that's not really a bad thing. But when you look at the rest of the results in recent games, Michigan State 16 points, Rutgers 10 points, Maryland 0, Indiana 14. Right? This is a fantastic defense that is smothering teams, 18 points allowed per game. I like this defense. They have a good chance against a banged up Utah offense.
Penn State ranks 4th nationally in opponent completion rating, 52.8%. They have also snagged 12 picks to only 10 touchdowns allowed. So this defense has certainly played very good. And they had depth concerns at linebacker coming into the year, and I think they've really found some answers there. So impressive work by James Franklin this year on this team. Because I had them winning 6 games, and here they are in the Rose Bowl. Team comparisons, pretty even, Nick. As even as it comes, I think this will be a great game because of it. Quarterback will give Cam Rising the edge, but Sean Clifford has certainly been a very sound dual threat player in his own right over his entire career. Running back will give Penn State the slight edge, but still 2 great 1-2 punches for both of these teams. Wide receiver, I think Penn State will get a little bit of an edge there. A little bit more production from the Utah wide receivers, but I think Lambert Smith and Wallace, they're going to get involved in this one, and they're going to make their names known a little bit. Offensive line will give the edge to Utah there. I think it's a little bit more physical of a unit. Defensive line, it's really as even as it comes. I'm going to give Penn State the slight edge on that one. Linebacker, we'll go ahead and give that edge to Utah. And Nick, guess what? The trend continues. We'll go ahead and give Penn State the edge in the secondary. Like I said, these teams are very neck and neck at all of these categories. I'm sure you have plenty of disagreements.
Yeah, one of the toughest games to pick during Bowl Mania is this game, considering these teams are just so even. I think I'd give the linebacking to the Penn State. I think there's the numbers, true volume of linebacking talent, I think really does put this team over the edge, considering how young they are and they're continuing to develop. I'll also probably throw the wide receiving to Utah. I think that, I think Parks and Ville are so talented and just really have a chance here to kind of break out, especially Parks. I think he has a big breakout game. I'm painting him to have a good day. I like Penn State's wide receiving core. I just think that considering they lose their top receiver in Parker Washington, that really hurts them for me. Running back, I think, if Tavion Thomas was playing, I think you can make the case for Utah, but considering he's not playing, definitely have to go with Penn State. I think the secondary as well, very close, but Penn State certainly gets the edge for me.
I'll get final thoughts on the prediction. I think for Utah, they got to be physical up front, and tackling underneath will be crucial. Parker Washington now being out means that's not going to be as necessary, but Tinsley's still a guy that can attack you underneath. Penn State, bring the penetration on the defensive line, challenge vertically with their running game. I don't know what's going to happen in this game, Nick. I love the Rose Bowl. It's my favorite bowl game every year. I'm going to take Utah to win a thriller, but it's going to be more of a defensive thriller. You see a little bit more offense. I'm going to take the Utes by 4 points. I'm not writing home about this one, only a couple of confidence points. I do think this will probably be the best New Year's Six game on the docket. Felt that way when it was announced. Very underrated game, very quiet. No one really seems to care about Penn State because not many people have talked about them at all this year. No one really seems to care about the Utes, even though they're coming off a very impressive win against USC. Very underrated game, but I think come the end of January 2nd, a lot of people are going to be talking about how amazing this one was.
Very underrated game. I have to give a lot of credit to James Franklin. You and I both said in August that we thought this team was a 6-7 win team. Didn't really see the direction this team was going. They have definitely blown away my expectations, blown away your expectations as well, I believe, considering that they put up 10 wins. I thought they had a disadvantage at quarterback. Clifford played a lot better than I thought he would. I thought the ceiling had been met. He played a little bit better than that. I'm going to take Utah in this game. I think Utah just has enough talent on defense to hold Penn State here. I think there'll be a little more points scored. I think the first half will be a little more free-flowing. Remember last year, Utah played in the Rose Bowl game against Ohio State. There were a lot of points scored in that game. I think this game had potential to score a lot of points here. I think they'll hit the over. The over is 52.5. I got about 65 points total scored. This is a fun matchup. I think there's a lot of exciting players playing in this game, a lot of young players. This is definitely a matchup of two teams that have great futures heading forward under two long-term coaches who have great program stability. I like this matchup. The Rose Bowl is a fun game, historic venue, and I'm excited to watch this one.
I definitely think if Penn State wins, then this momentum is going to carry them into a top 10 ranking next year, and that should certainly potentially set them up for a playoff run. We'll see what happens, though, Nick. This is going to be a great one. I don't know if they'll beat last year's expectations, but, year after year, this game just seems to get wilder and wilder somehow. So we'll see what happens. As always, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to this one. Last year's game was fantastic. This game certainly should be fantastic as well.
That's for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.